Hi guys, and welcome to episode 1 of Breaking Through with Ellina Abovian. This podcast is nearly a year in the making. It's a reflection of where I am in my life, what I'm dealing with, and what brought me to this moment. The first episode, I am gently peeling back the layers of my childhood, how I started in journalism, and the big life change that brought me to this point. As my first guest, I invited relationship coach and therapist Silvy Khoucasian to help me dive deep into this very personal conversation. I'm really excited, but also really nervous, so thank you for taking the time to be here with me. My goal is to create a space for honesty, vulnerability, so we can all find a pathway to feeling more seen, heard, inspired, and at peace. Silvy Khoucasian, thank you so much for being here today. This is episode 1 of Breaking Through with Ellina Abovian. This is a podcast I've been preparing for several months, and I was really thinking about how I would do the first episode without just diving into it, but actually doing a really good introductory episode. And honestly, you're the first person that came to mind that could help kind of get the wheels in motion. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so honored, truly.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you and I met like 18 years ago. We were kind of on the same path back then. Tell everyone a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Silvy Khoucasian. I'm a relationship coach, got my master's in psychology, marriage, and family therapy, and I've been working with everyone in the developmental spectrum, from little kids, preschool, teenagers, adults, couples, families. And I just love helping people understand themselves and really learn how to communicate and create connection in all their relationships. And so really the combination of self-expression and relationship skills is my favorite part of my work.
Yeah, and I follow you on social media, have really great content, you give great advice. And so that's why I felt, okay, it would be really cool for the first episode to have someone who really speaks that language of psychology and of breaking through, and who can be here to kind of open me up to this new dialogue, this new space that I'm in. Instead of me steering the conversation for the first time, I'm kind of going to allow you to do that. And I think that's a really cool way to break the ice.
I'm so excited. I'm honored to take the lead a little bit.
Yeah, take the pressure off me for a second.
Take the pressure off. You relax. Let's get you. You got your water. You got all your fun stuff there.
Just need a glass of wine.
Just need a glass of wine. Yes,
That'd be nice.
Exactly. So I want to know, and I'm sure your audience really would love to know, what inspired this podcast? What are some of the, the core values you're hoping to inspire in other people as they watch? Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I've been in news for 15 years, and I feel like in my job, I've sort of seen it all. I've met so many people. I've interviewed so many different types of people, and going through all the years in news, nothing really hit home like the pandemic. And post-pandemic, seeing people out and about and just even interviewing people on the simplest things, I really got a sense of sort of the suffering in people's lives. I feel like people are so disconnected right now. They are really looking for something that is going to make them feel seen and heard. And I feel like we have so much that connects us as far as technology goes, but we don't know how to connect anymore. And that was really one of the reasons why I thought I need to do something with the tools that I have that goes beyond news, that goes beyond breaking news, and goes more into personal breakthroughs. This is something that I'm personally very invested in, something that I feel really passionate about, given what I've been through in my life over the last few years. And it was really like a natural thought. And even though I thought to do it a few years ago, I didn't feel like I was necessarily coming from a place of optimal integrity, because I was going through something in my personal life that made me feel very conflicted. And I felt like until I figure that out, I can't be on any stage talking to people about these things until I can come to terms with this myself first. So fast forward to now, I really feel like I'm in a position where I can honestly carry these conversations, be authentic, be vulnerable, be very candid about my personal experience, and also let people see that, the most strength comes from hitting rock bottom, comes from vulnerability. I've been through it, lately, and it's just coming from a very genuine place.
Beautiful. Well, I couldn't agree more with the with the vulnerability as being the biggest strength that we have.
Yeah.
And when you first reached out and you shared some of those core values of vulnerability, transparency, and authenticity, I was like, yes, sign me up.
Right.
Because I think especially as Armenians, you know, it's one of the other additional challenges we go through is, you know, we're kind of taught to be very restraint oriented and hold it in, be strong, don't ask for help. And then we're all going through the same challenges behind closed doors. And everyone is so hungry to be authentic about it, but we don't know how to do that. Who's going to take the first step, right?
No, exactly. And in news too, you are essentially taught to, you know, you're doing breaking news. And so you're talking about what's happening every single day. You have to get down to the nitty gritty, to the facts, to inform people. But this is about being personal to inspire people. So it's a totally different thing. And I feel like with being Armenian, yes, you are taught to a certain extent. There's a saying that we have, it says, "Tsaneregi," right? And I hate that. The literal translation means to be heavy. And I understand, you know, it's in the context of be classy. That's what it means.
Yes.
But I feel like that goes beyond that. And we almost internalize it like, don't share too much because you never know when it'll be used against you. Don't speak up because you will be looked at in this way or that way. And that's counterintuitive to who we are as human beings. We need community. We need to communicate. We need to connect.
And how much closer do we feel to those in our lives when they are authentic and vulnerable?
Absolutely.
That's the ironic thing. It's like it's one of, you know, as I've worked with a lot of Armenians in my work and in the, you know, in the immigrant community and bicultural community, that's one of the biggest challenges. It's like the very thing that we need to create that connection is the very thing we're conditioned to not expose ourselves.
Exactly. And I think with this podcast, my main goal really is to identify what these barriers are because we all want to live happy lives, successful, healthy. And the goal here is really to break all that down and to understand what areas can we break through in. And that's why I specifically chose the name Breakthrough, because I think that in order to have a breakthrough, you have to hit a wall. You have to be truly honest with yourself. And only then can you really see things clearly. And the breakthroughs can come in so many different ways. It can be a tiny breakthrough with, you know, how you eat. We'll be talking about diets, exercise, you know, that's one component. I'm like a big believer in eating protein now and lifting weights. And that's something I never did before. So it's like little things like that lead to small breakthroughs in our day-to-day lives and our habits, and also really big breakthroughs like life changes, which I've also gone through in the last few years. So it's across the board.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited for the future episodes. But for the sake of this episode, I want to hear more about your journey. I know, again, 18 years. Last time we were sitting in the same room together. So much has happened for both of us. You know, we've both been trying to find ourselves and cultivate an authentic sense of self in the midst of this bicultural experience. So I want to hear from you, you know, from acting to journalism. Fill us in. What happened in that gap? What's been going on?
What happened in the gap?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you and I met while we were both taking acting classes because I think at that time I was like 19 or 20. I really was bit by, I wouldn't say bit by the acting bug because I was kind of a born performer, truthfully. I think looking back to when I was 3-4 years old, I was putting on performances. I loved being able to use my voice, my body as a way of storytelling. It was just like, it came so naturally to me. And even at the age of 5, it like lit me up from within to be able to do that. Simultaneously, I loved watching the news as a kid because I just thought the anchors were so regal, you know, so that was also a big part of my yearning to work in television. All throughout elementary school, junior high, I did theater. It's funny, I ran into some friends from high school and they're like, I always knew you were going to work in TV because you just had that in you when you were a kid. And I think that's a special quality. If you can identify that in yourself or in your kids, you know, I see it in my older son, he has that quality. So to identify that when you're really young and to stick with it is a big thing. So I did consistently stick with it. It's just, I never was sure if this is what I would do as a profession. I just knew I loved to do it as a creative outlet. And right around the time where I was like a freshman in college, a sophomore in college, I thought, you know, I really do think I want to pursue this professionally. I'm going to take a year off of school and just go for it. I'm not going to have a side job. I'm not going to do anything else. I was a firm believer that if you have a plan B, you eventually fall back on it. So I'm giving myself no space to land. I'm just going to dive right in.
Okay.
And I think that speaks to my character as a person. When I do something, I really go all the way. And I was having pretty good success for a newbie. You know, I had an acting agent, a modeling agent. I was getting booked on little shows, little parts here and there, and just like slowly building, you know, that IMDb page was like growing. And I was really proud of, you know, the fact that I can do this. And I felt that if I continued, I probably would have made it.
Yeah.
But we didn't continue.
We didn't continue.
Neither of us did.
Well, it's interesting. Your path led you to journalism, and mine took me down the rabbit hole of therapy world and coaching world, and really.
Did you also grow up loving acting?
You know, I relate to a lot of your story as far as like the performing aspect. I would sing. My parents have all these like old recorded videos of me, just me and my sisters like stealing the microphone from each other, singing around the house. And I also think for me, you know, I immigrated to America with my family when I was 4. And it was rough, you know. The immigrant journey is no
Not
joke.
easy, no.
It's not easy. And I could feel the heaviness of what my parents were carrying. And I definitely could feel that there was a part of me that wanted to provide joy and lighten that heaviness in the household. So for me, that performativeness for sure came partly from that.
It had a
role.
purpose.
It definitely had a purpose.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did we both change course? There's
That's-
always that break in the
that's
road,
the
right? That
question.
fork in the road.
Yes.
Well, I think I was around 21 at the time, and I met my now ex-husband. And I think to really understand our choices, you have to go back to the root cause of it.
Yes.
I grew up without my father around. At the age of 9, my dad moved to a different country for work.
Wow.
And still lives there now. So I grew up probably with a very deep-rooted fear of abandonment. I remember I have like these images of me as a kid at the airport watching my dad leave and being very unsure if he would ever come back. And so I feel like I grew up with the sense of constantly looking out the window, you know, at like yearning for something else. And being a product of a divorced family back then was taboo. Now it's like, you know, very common.
Yeah.
But back then I always felt like it was something that I had to be ashamed of, or it was something that I needed to remedy, you know? And to me, the fix to that was a big Armenian family, something that I never had. And subconsciously, I think I always kind of searched for a father figure in all the men I dated. And I never really dated a lot before I met my ex-husband, maybe like a couple, you know, childhood like flings here and there, but nothing serious. And he was like this first serious man, 11 years older, very charming, and just bigger than life. And I very quickly became attached to that. And, you know.
Yeah. He fulfilled a certain part of you that void that you were trying to fill.
Yeah, definitely a void that I was trying to fill. I think that's one part of it. You know, you can't discredit the fact that we also were a great couple and, you know, had a lot of fun together. We're very good friends. So it's like you have that and you also have like this immediate attachment because you're young and you don't really know how to take your time and really understand or listen to yourself and your intuition. You know, understanding your choices is such a big thing, but you don't know that at 21 years old. So even if it's a great thing, you're not necessarily in tune with your gut, your intuition.
You're still like cultivating who you are. I mean, our brain isn't even finished
Right.
developing until we're 20, 25 years old.
I mean, like in American society, right? It's like 18, you're an adult, go.
Yes.
But in our Armenian family, at 21, you're still a very sheltered girl.
Yes.
I had never paid bills on my own. I had never really done anything, lived on my own, nothing. I was still a kid, as I'm sure you were too, you know, around that time. I was just like having fun in this like new space and figuring myself out. And here I meet this great guy and he didn't like what I was doing. He essentially said, that's not a life for an Armenian girl. I remember those words specifically. And because I felt like I needed safety and because I felt like I really needed that family dynamic around me, I was like, okay, I guess you're right. I guess I'm doing something bad. But I really wasn't. And it was just something I was very passionate about. But by making that choice to abandon this passion of mine, it's like you're abandoning a very big part of yourself. And I didn't feel it at the time as much because I thought, I'm getting engaged and it's exciting. And I was engaged by the time I was 22 years old and, you know, now integrated into this new environment of a big family and lots of friends and, you know, it's all fun, but at the same time, it's just happening really fast.
And I think it's the question that all of us also are always thinking about when we enter a relationship is, how do I have the intimacy, closeness, love, friendship, and all the beautiful things with relationship while also still getting to stay connected to my sense of self?
Right. I didn't have a sense of self.
Yeah.
I was 21. I identified with just a few things about myself.
Yeah.
And it's funny, my ex-husband used to always call me a hippie. And he didn't mean it in like the 70s TV, idea of a hippie, like smoking, weed in like weird clothes. He meant like a free spirit.
I see.
And I always loved that about myself. I thought that that was the most special part of me. But I was made to think that it was something I needed to change. And when you're trying to change something that is so innate to you, it really creates a big sense of internal conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think for a long time, I went through that internal conflict thinking, am I doing the right thing? Am I, am I making everybody happy? It's like you're constantly second guessing yourself.
Totally. And it's hard because, like you said, when we're making these choices when we are so young and we haven't developed that sense of self, we don't know what our values are. But that essence, that part of you, the free spirit, was always there. And I imagine is still there and it will always be there.
She will always be there. She'll always be there.
Right?
Yeah. So at the time, he's like, well, what else are you interested in? And I remember this conversation specifically. We were sitting in the car and I said, well, I've always kind of liked broadcast journalism too. I think I can do that, because it's kind of the same skill set in a sense of like performing. And I think I have the sensitivity and also just like a very open mind where I can be a journalist. I can actually understand different sides of a story. And I settled on that. And now that became my new obsession. So I went back to school. Within a year and a half, I had a degree in broadcast journalism ready to go.
Okay.
So, and I got started, for the first year, I think it was hard to leave LA. Being an Armenian, we're not really encouraged to leave the nest, quote unquote, especially if you're not married yet. And at this point, I was like 24 years old. I was engaged, but I wasn't married. And I had to move away for work, which was like a big thing.
That is a big deal in the Armenian community.
Totally. For his family, for my family. But I said, look, I already gave up on one dream of mine. I'm not giving up on this because I think I can really make this work. And so I went to San Luis Obispo, then I went to Fresno and then San Diego and never looked back. And I slowly climbed the ladder of news and I'm still here.
And you're pretty damn great at it. Let's just call that out.
Thank you.
Beautiful. I mean, for me, it's like I'm always looking at the different ways so many parts of ourselves are constantly getting weaved together, and relationships impact us as well as, like you said, the family of origin experiences, like that experience of father being away and having that desire for reconnection and how to create that sense of stability. Stability is a huge desire for anybody that has the abandonment wound that I've worked with.
Absolutely.
For me, it's interesting. I have the opposite, which is more like the suffocation wound. So I grew up because I felt so responsible for the emotional climate in my family system. I was always very much so hyper attuned to what was happening for everybody else. I took on the caretaker role. It's no surprise.
Everybody needs to be happy for me to be happy.
Everybody needs to be happy. Everyone needs to be emotionally okay. And so I chose a partner now that was very independent and kind of has his own, sense of self. And it gives me that kind of freedom to be able to reconnect with a lot of parts of myself that I feel like I lost and disconnected from.
How old were you when you met?
I was a lot older. I was 31.
Okay. Yeah.
So that made a huge
31,
difference.
21. Big difference.
Oh my God. Huge. I mean, my relationship when I was 19, I was with for 7 years. I had no idea. And especially I think in Armenian culture and a lot of communal cultures, we're not really encouraged to work on the self-development.
Not at all.
Not at all.
What is self-development?
What is that? If you're not giving or thinking about others and taking care of that communal aspect, it doesn't really exist.
Right.
And America is this individualistic culture. Armenia is a communal culture as well as a lot of other immigrant cultures. And so you and I are like trying to bridge, but I need to find my sense of self.
Yeah, coexist.
How do we do that?
Right. Because I really do value that part of us.
Yes.
Wanting to take care of and wanting to be there for people, but also at the same time, where do you set that boundary? And we don't talk about this at all enough in our community. And we don't teach it to young women to really value themselves and to just slow down. Now when I look back at my life, I don't regret any of it. It all happened for a reason. I have beautiful moments and so much to look back on. But at the same time, if I could go back to my 21-year-old self, I would tell her, just slow down.
Slow down.
And you don't need to give away your power to anyone else to feel safe, because then that takes away your voice. It takes away your ability to trust yourself, which then takes away your ability to reason, which also takes away your ability to just make simple decisions. So as something as easy as buying an outfit, you're looking for reassurance from that person. And, you know, that's cute and that's great, but it also creates such codependency. For me at that age, being so young, I had this new big title of being a fiance. That's a big job for a 21-year-old. And so I worked really hard to fulfill that role the best that I could. Because also when you go into a family that's not your immediate family, that love, no matter what at the end of the day, is conditional. And so I was always afraid that if I didn't do certain things the right way, that I would lose that love, right? Again, goes back to like that fear of abandonment.
Yes,
and so whether you agree with the mentality or not, you are not questioning yourself, you're just going with it. And again, down the line, all that is gonna pop up.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, part of what we're talking about and what you're sharing is the importance of self-awareness and just cultivating a sense of what's the why behind the things that I'm doing? What's the why behind the behaviors? What's the origin story here? You know, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And I think, you know, we all have different vulnerabilities that we carry. You know, mine is that feeling of suffocation. And even in, you know, scenarios where I'm not experiencing that, or I'm not feeling like somebody's needing something from me or wanting something from me, I can still project that experience. And therefore, usually opt out before I feel that suffocation experience. So I was the runner. I was like, oh, this is getting too intense. There's going to be needs, things requested of me. I got to go before it gets too deep.
Right.
And really unlearning that, right? The deconditioning of these patterns is so valuable so that we can make choices that are aligned with what we're trying to create.
Right, of course. And I think the hard lesson too that I've learned in my life is that you cannot change anyone. You cannot change a family. You cannot change society. You just can't. It's never going to happen. The only thing you can do is work on yourself and be the example for the energy in the room. I didn't understand that when I was younger. I was such a people pleaser. I thought that if someone was mad, are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? But again, it all comes back to taking yourself at a very vulnerable age and putting yourself in a foreign environment and like almost learning to swim against the current.
Absolutely. And it's a forever job. I think that's one of the misconceptions that people have. You know, we carry these vulnerabilities with us forever. You know, like you said, that people-pleasing tendency, it's hanging out in the background. You know, it's always there, just ready to kind of work its magic. But that wiser, we're working on really cultivating that wiser sense of self that knows how to like, okay, let's put that part of us in the passenger seat and let's take the steering wheel.
I saw myself slowly changing, and my family saw me slowly changing, and my friends saw me slowly changing, being a more serious person, being a little more, I don't know, just different. Someone who like fell in line. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I embrace everything I learned in the sense of like setting a table and taking care of people and being more compassionate. I completely acknowledge all that and I appreciate it. But on the flip side to that, there's also overextending yourself and compromising maybe some of your own beliefs because you are now part of this new family and you have to go with their flow, which oftentimes does happen in our culture. You know, it's like you have to do what they say. You have to follow their lead.
I'm curious, what has been your journey with being able to express your needs and your boundaries in this transitional journey that you've been on?
I'm just learning that now, to be honest.
Great.
No, I think it more happened to me, really when I became a woman, because I think for such a long time I was trapped as this little girl working on herself professionally, but not working on herself personally. Because my growth, in a sense, I feel like was stunted at that age, you know, because I found my comfort zone now. You know, I found a man that could kind of serve as this protective role. And I didn't feel like I needed to grow up. I felt like I could kind of stay in that safe space, you know? And so I really pushed myself in my work. And within like 4 years, I was back in LA and already working at KTLA, which is like unheard of for someone in that business. Normally it takes people like 10 years, but I was like laser focused. and moved back to LA. Before I know it, I'm married and I'm having a baby and then buying a house and buying another house. And then it's like life gets busy, you know, you get into the rat race. And I think I truly fell into my womanhood after I had kids and, you know, just doing tough things in life, right? Like balancing a family and excelling in a career, being able to be good at different things. I was very obsessed with then creating like this perfect persona of being a really good wife, being a good mom, being someone who is good at her job, working in television, you know, being a steward in her community and succeeding again in all these roles. And so again, I just wasn't questioning what was happening on the inside. It was more just like overdrive. And so many of us fall into that rat race, right? We just want to succeed. There's nothing wrong with that. But I wasn't checking in with myself. And I don't think anyone else was really checking in with me either. That's a problem in our society.
Very much.
We don't stop to ask what's going on inside.
Yes. And there's a loneliness epidemic within that, you know? I think part of what led me to leave the acting industry was, it was a really nice like stepping stone for me. Like I was like, wow, I get to feel and express my feelings. I've never been able to really do it in that kind of way. It's very,
Right.
it's a intoxicating feeling is the way
Yes,
that I would
it
describe,
is.
right? But it got to a point for me, Ellina, where I was like, I'm sharing how I am feeling through these characters. So I wasn't ever really feeling connected to myself.
Right.
And my story and how to integrate it with my own experiences.
How did you figure out how to connect to yourself?
So actually, I did this transformational workshop that one of my friends was like, just come do this thing. I was like, I don't know. It was a little culty for me.
Okay.
But I ended up doing it and I cried for a week straight. I
Wow.
cried for a week straight and I just got to really release a lot of the pain that I was holding, that I was trying to manage for everybody else.
What was the pain that you were holding?
Whew, man, I think a lot of mine was holding my family's experiences. You know, witnessing my parents leave their entire extended family behind. No longer, basically, this was in the era where you had to, you know, pay for every minute you have a phone call with someone. There was like spotty Skype calls, you know, and that disconnection and the profound grief that they were going through. I was a very highly sensitive kid, always have been. And I just felt like I soaked it up like a sponge. And I took on that role of caregiver and felt hyper responsible. And so I just got to really be validated in that. Like I got to have a person, you know, I think our pain really wants to be witnessed.
It does.
It needs to be witnessed. The work alone is beautiful. We can do mirror work, we can journal, we can do all of that, meditate, beautiful. But really, the connective, integrative experience has to happen, in my opinion, through being witnessed by safe people, whether it's a professional, close friends, a community that we create.
Right.
And when we are brave enough to be vulnerable, I think the people that are ready to be vulnerable will start to pop like little chickens, like
Totally.
popping,
Yeah.
But not everyone will. Like you said, we can't change people. I had so many friends I wanted to take with me.
Yeah.
So many.
I think ultimately we're all on a spectrum of
Yes.
sensitivity and vulnerability.
Yes.
And then there's a time in everyone's life where they kind of come into it more or they never do.
Well, they never do.
But again, my purpose with this podcast is really to help people understand how we can expand. Because what's the point of this life if we're not going to expand and have a higher self of consciousness? In this journey, even though I've done therapy, I've also really become very spiritual. And I'm not a religious person. I've never read the Bible. Maybe I should, because I know it has a lot of great things. But it's more like a feeling of oneness. And that was probably what I was searching for, because I felt very surrounded in my life at the time, but I was very disconnected from everything, especially myself. And I feel like I, for 15 years, was on this like trajectory of creating a life, but also lost myself in the process. And I felt so guilty again and so shameful that I have this beautiful life on the outside and I'm not happy. And I started to think, what's wrong with me? You must be so selfish and so spoiled that you don't love your life. Look at all that you have and all that you worked for. It's like the Elizabeth Gilbert quote from Eat, Pray, Love, where she says, I single-handedly participated in the building of this life, but why can't I see myself in it? And I experienced that, and she She was on her bathroom floor talking to God. And that's really what happens. I was at a point where I needed help because I wasn't figuring out what was wrong with me either. It was just, I felt like I can't continue like this anymore. And it took me, well, the guilt and the shame of it, right? But also having a very public job where every single day I have to put on this straight face. And then you come home and you have to be a wife and a mother and all these things. The pressure of it really gets to you. And it got to me where I just hit a wall. I don't think anyone was seeing it, but I was feeling it. It wasn't normal to go to parties and look for an exit. It was, something was shifting in me, you know, and I couldn't understand what it was. It's like my alignment was totally changing. My access was changing. And it took hitting a wall and just having a total breakdown of being very honest with myself, taking full inventory of my life and making some very big changes. And one of them was, you know, the dissolution of my marriage. And, you know, I mean, it's huge. It's huge. That's not something I ever thought I would do, you know, especially coming from a divorced family. I never thought I would end up in that space, but.
Yeah. Those moments, those bringing us to our knees moments where
oh yeah,
we are really forced to face that fork in the road of and it's almost like you can't even do the thing that you've been doing. Something shifts where we've outgrown the box. It's not a box, but the life, the identity that we have cultivated, and there's a need for that expansion. And I know a lot of peers that they do stay in situations that are incredibly painful and self-abandoning. And I think, you know, in some ways, I wish our culture was more supportive when people are able to make those choices and not judgmental and really come from a place of empathy and understanding and curiosity. That's what we're doing in this conversation, right? To really bridge more of helping people to carve their own paths and also, again, I might get a lot of slack for what I'm about to say here from the Armenian community, but every relationship has its own timeline journey.
Yeah.
You know, I wish it was forever. I hope in some cases it is.
And I mean, you get married hoping for forever, you know, and you work for forever. But
there's lessons in everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a lesson. And I think, you know, it's funny. I think life in itself is a journey of lessons, right?
Yes.
And there is a plan you can have for yourself. There's a plan that God has for you. And when I say God, I really mean like, you know, the universe or source or whatever you believe in. And I think like there is free will and there's also, you know, God's plan for you. Yes. And I think along the way there are signs and then free will kind of gets in the way and you make decisions because you think, okay, this is right for me, or it's based in fear, or it's based on trauma, based on social conditioning, all these things. And you kind of get off the trajectory. But along the way, there are always signs, there are always lessons. And I believe you will keep making the same mistake in life until you eventually learn that lesson and until you kind of correct course. And for me, you know, my marriage just didn't fit anymore. It was a situation where we had grown apart. Yeah. And you have to accept that.
Yes.
And for me, it was a very painful decision and a very difficult decision. But for me personally, a necessary decision. And it wasn't just the marriage. It was a lot of things that I had to question, you know, things that I was saying yes to that didn't feel aligned with who I am, you know, certain events, certain organizations that wanted to work with me or different things that I felt like I was saying yes because it was all feeding this idea of the ego, right? The Ellina Abovian name, but not necessarily what I want to do. And I think the earlier you can learn your no's and close doors, and no, I don't want to say close doors, but essentially say, this isn't for me. Yes. That's when you open space for what is for you. And that does come.
So
but
beautiful.
It takes a long journey to kind of learn that.
For women in particular to be, when we're conditioned to be the nurturers, the caretakers, and to be able to accommodate, to be able to get to the point where we can say no and not get swallowed in the guilt and shame that we've talked about.
The guilt and the shame.
It's a lifetime of work. I mean, I've been doing this professionally for 15 years, and the boundaries expression, the needs expression is still, it's hard. It's a lot easier than it was. But now, you know, my husband's like, you say no a lot more than you say yes. I'm like, I know. And that's just exactly what you said.
Yeah, but that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to accommodate everyone in every situation.
Do you know how many people they're pulling
Yes.
at us constantly?
Yes, absolutely.
You know?
When I was going through that experience, I want to say one of the tell signs if someone maybe feels like they might be in a similar boat, I was seeking to be alone a lot.
Yes.
I was going on really long hikes. And if you know me, know I love to hike. And it's like I was just searching for that alone time. And I was being pulled towards certain like material to read. I was being pulled towards certain, music. And, because for a long time, for some reason, I felt like I couldn't feel anything. I was listening to music and not feeling it. I was, looking for ways to numb myself, whether it was having 3 martinis instead of 2. Or looking for little vacations all the time to sort of give yourself something to look forward to instead of acknowledging the actual problem. And it's part of the reason why I never started my own show or started something else that I wanted to do, because I had a lot of side projects at the time and I couldn't make it happen for myself. It's like I was blocking myself because I felt like if I just add one more thing to my plate and make myself even busier without actually acknowledging this issue, fixing the motor inside first, I'm going to go crazy. And so I think I was resisting all of these opportunities because I felt like, no. Subconsciously, I knew you need to really address what's going on in you first.
The core.
Yeah.
The core, that the whisper that's just like keeps
But once you do,
oh man,
everything opens. I swear to you. Everything just changes
it
because
starts to shift.
I mean, I want to say for a good 6 months, it was nothing, where it was just like the grieving the pain of all that, and very deep pain and, lots of moments on the floor and all that.
Thank you for acknowledging the grief part. I think
course.
people need to hear.
And you have to
real
honor
that
that.
is.
You
Yeah.
have to let yourself sit in the shame of it, the grief, the judgment, whatever you want to call it, the sadness, the guilt. I have children, and so all of that. Yeah. And you have to really acknowledge it and feel it and then say, okay, but I'm still going to move forward. Yeah. Because what I felt in the final days for me was this energy pushing me out the door. And I couldn't ignore that energy. It wasn't coming from anyone. No one intervened in my life to tell me you should do this, you shouldn't do this. It was solely me. And it is what it is. I think after a good 6 months, I then slowly kind of peeled myself off the floor and it started to make sense. And I went into a lot of meditation, sitting still a lot, really just allowing sort of the new wisdom to sink in. And I think the new self-trust to really start to develop. And now it's like, I'm not worried about anything because I know no matter what happens, I got this. Like I can take care of myself. I can take care of my children. You just have like this feeling of being divinely protected because you just feel this connection, this oneness.
That's so beautiful. That experience of sovereignty that I think, when I'm working with the different attachment patterns, that might have to be a whole other episode, Ellina, but when I'm working with the abandonment wound, we're always working towards that self-sovereignty experience. That's the healing to move towards. When we're working towards somebody that has more avoidant patterns, we're working towards helping them actually be more relational. So it's interesting how we all have different medicine that we all need.
Right.
And we only know what that medicine is through taking that time to slow down and pay attention to what are those signs, what are those signals. It's interesting what you said about what we plan versus what the universe has. My first business card when I first started doing therapy as an associate was, we must let go of the life we've planned to embrace the one that's waiting for us, by Joseph Campbell. I'm probably butchering a little bit, but
no, I totally get the gist of it, and I agree with you. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it just comes from surrender.
That's the word.
You have to surrender to,
That's the word.
I'm open now. I don't look at it like I need to now do this and I need to now do this. Now it's all about, I'm going to let it flow. And whatever feels right, it's what I'm going to work on and what I'm going to do. And there's no pressure. There is no need to fill that ego. It's all about, coming from a more soulful place and just a more like grounded place. And it all boils down to that healing internally. I think I had to have a conversation with my little kid self when I was 9 years old, watching my dad leave, and really just forgiving that situation too, and looking at how I'm never going to repeat that again. in life. And it's not because you tell yourself, I'm never going to repeat it. It's because you teach yourself how to love yourself. You teach yourself that you're enough. You teach yourself that no one is ever going to tell you who you are, how you're supposed to be. There's no need for that in life. You know, you're fully capable of deciding who you are.
It's so beautiful. I hope every Armenian girl around the world just listens to those words and just feels the love and the genuine vulnerability in that.
Yeah.
To feel that sense of empowerment as a woman, that we are capable, that we can do hard things. Glennon Doyle, we thank you for that one. And just, I think there's something to that as a woman trying to break through that conditioning as well. Like, I know I relate to that so much. There's so many adventures that I think I wanted to take, so many things I wanted to do, but I was so afraid.
Right.
So afraid.
Me too.
You know? I get it. My parents came from a different culture, and I'm trying to do all these things. Even just wearing shorts was like so taboo. And so that fear I internalized. And now it's actually, I'm 41 years old, and I'm in a season of my life where I'm challenging myself to do courageous things, little things. People listening, like, it doesn't have to be big things. It's little things that are just a little outside my comfort zone, and just really pushing myself to feel that sense of empowerment that I think is, you know, for women, the work is empowerment. For men, the work that I often do with them is really helping them with vulnerability.
Yeah.
Especially with Armenian men. I was, driving in an Uber a couple of days ago, and I had the most beautiful, vulnerable conversation with an Armenian man. And it was just, for me, because that's something I haven't witnessed very much, it was just such a touching, beautiful moment that I hope that more and more Armenian men and, men from other cultures get to really feel safe to also be vulnerable. I think men also get often left out of this conversation.
They don't have the tools.
Yeah.
We don't blame them.
I know.
I think a beautiful balance would be if women found their voice a little more,
Yes.
and if men learned to give that voice away a little more, and we can meet in the middle.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Making space to create more balance and not being so rigid with those gender roles and expectations.
Do you find more and more Armenian couples coming into therapy, into counseling?
I do, definitely. I mean, they find me behind closed doors. They definitely do.
You don't know how many people have told me, oh my gosh, yeah, I follow Silvy. And,
That's very
it's
sweet.
like people are becoming slowly more and
Watching.
more self-conscious.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it is thanks to social media.
Yes.
The transformation industry is growing. And I don't want to call it an industry because it's really it's a lifelong practice. What would be your advice to someone who's seeking change or doesn't even know where to start?
Yeah, I think, social media is a double-edged sword. It has its challenges, but I also think it has really opened up the floodgates with people being really raw and real about their challenges, and normalized a lot of just the human journey. I'm surely that's what me and my partner, that's one of our core values in the work that we do, is just owning the stuff. And I think, it starts with just taking a small step towards sharing something that might feel a little scary, that's real for you, with people that are empathic and compassionate and kind, and then see how that feels. See if that person meets you. See if you guys can start to have more real conversations. And of course, finding professional support is always a really great place to start. If you need a little bit more of a safe container with someone that can guide you, that can support you with the kinds of questions. Sometimes, I love expansive questions. They are just, can open us up to a whole new world of possibility.
Totally.
So being around curious people, like what you said, Ellina, there were so many people around you, but nobody knew what was going on for you. That's not acceptable in our world. Like, really, we should know. I don't mean it from your end.
No,
but
I know. I did a great job of hiding it.
Yeah.
And I think that just comes from my professional candor.
Yeah.
No one knew because I didn't want anyone to know. Yeah. I needed to be very certain on my own what I was going to do before I let anyone into that, because I didn't want anyone's influence. I wasn't looking for confirmation bias, none of that. And I think oftentimes we can, when you're going through such a big life change, you want your parents or your girlfriend to be like, yep, I agree. You should do that.
Exactly.
But no, you really need to sit with that decision, because ultimately it's yours and yours only. Regardless of what it is. If you want to end a marriage or end a job or start something new, it's all like, you have to build that self-trust. And I think for me, the best way of building self-trust was just acknowledging surrender. I don't know how else to explain it. I think meditation helps a lot. People ask me all the time, like, how do I meditate?
I was just gonna ask you
What's
the same
your
question.
advice for meditation as a professional?
I want to know what kind of meditation you do. Do you sit in stillness? Do you listen to guided words?
I don't do guided.
don't do
I
guided.
do certain music that helps me kind of get into that mode. And it can be any time of day. I try to in the morning when I'm not working. Otherwise, during Monday through Friday, I'm usually like right out the door. And so also like my work really contributed to a lack of like balancing my nervous system, because I would wake up 3 a.m. out the door. I'm on the scene of something very like traumatic.
That makes sense.
And so now I take the time, to wake up a little earlier, and I actually will like meditate in the car.
Okay.
Yeah, with my coffee. And really meditation is just closing your eyes, trying not to think, focusing on your breathing. And it takes, you guys, months to master. I'm not by any means a master at all, but I've gotten better. And I notice that as I've gotten better, if I put out just questions, right, that I want answers to, I swear to you throughout the day, those answers just come.
You feel the wisdom start pouring in.
I don't know if you've ever read Course in Miracles, but it's like God speaks to you through you. And it's absolutely true. And it's in the form of intuition. Another thing people ask a lot is like, well, how do you listen to your intuition? How do you know your intuition? And the intuition is a calm voice. It's never like, fear or anxiety speaks to you in a very aggressive way. But intuition is soft. And it just comes to you in like these little realizations, randomly you're working out and you're like, that makes sense.
It's beautiful. Meditation is profound. And I love that. It's so interesting. I brought up Course in Miracles this week with my husband. So here you go. Confirmation. You're bringing it up.
Course
for
in
anyone
Miracles.
that's interested in really cultivating it through the spiritual lens, and for people that are listening that might want more practical, meditation, start with 5 minutes. The Calm app is fantastic resource, has tons of guided. I like guided meditations, and I also like recommending early morning, right when you wake up, or right before bed. It's like this liminal period of the day where we have access to more of our unconscious. That can be a really powerful way of receiving that wisdom and information a little bit more easily. I'm a huge fan of just movement. Like I get so much of my inspiration just through walking and working out and just alone, that time to yourself to process and integrate your experience. For introverts, for extroverts, being around people and talking and saying things out loud can actually be a really powerful way.
I think people, especially after the pandemic, people didn't know how to be alone. And we really felt that during the pandemic.
Oh, man.
And being alone, I think I had that experience because I lived alone for 4 years, being away from LA, working in news. So I was always comfortable being alone. That was never the problem for me. But I realized what a problem it is for people after the pandemic, during the pandemic. And if there's anything I can encourage to anyone is spend time with yourself. Do something for an hour on your own every single day, because that's when you recharge your batteries. That's when you start thinking clearly. We are so busy throughout our days, right? Taking care of our kids, running from one errand to another. And it's like there's so much joy if you can take one thing out of the equation and just slow down. Yeah. Because what are we doing? What is this rat race for if we are just exhausting ourselves to the point of like,
I'm with you. I'm a huge believer in slowing down. One of my core values is spaciousness, and it's hard because we live in a culture that is very doing oriented and capitalistic based, and I'm often the slowest person in my party, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's so important to me. And what you're saying is that, so many indigenous cultures spend hours a day really cultivating that inner wisdom. Like imagine just doing the meditation 5 minutes a day. If we all did that,
I know
how much more compassion and wisdom and just self-connection. Like I feel the most joy when I'm just sitting and doing nothing. It's like, there I am.
Totally.
There I am. I wasn't there 5 minutes ago.
And for someone who doesn't understand that, it can be perceived as man. Are you spacing out? Are you lazy?
Exactly.
It's like, no, I'm healing. I'm healing myself.
Exactly.
I wish you knew what that was about.
Yes.
In your practice, what are some of like the most common issues people come to you with? Because I know what I've seen just in my, field being an eyewitness to like life. But what do you see?
Yeah, so I work I work as a coach relationally. I really focus on helping people understand themselves, connect to themselves, and learn how to express their insides in their relationships in a way that's respectful, kind, and just thoughtful of the other person. So a lot of times people come to me because they're struggling in their relationships, meaning they don't know how to express their needs. They don't even know they don't know what their boundaries even are, let alone express it. And then it ends up coming out in a fight, in an explosion, in a moment where they're just not able to really, they don't have the language to articulate what's going on inside.
Absolutely.
Let alone express it in a vulnerable way. So here I come in, my life's work, because that's been my biggest challenge, is I would always express the thing in a non-vulnerable way. I would never get the thing that I wanted because I was being critical and harsh. And I was like, of course I don't get the thing. But it was devastating for me. I was like, I'm so hungry to create that connection, but I didn't have the tools. I didn't know how. And so I really help people identify what their core needs are, what their attachment patterns are, what their boundaries are. And I help them craft the languaging to start being vulnerable and relationally sensitive and aware. So it's really, it's both. It's a both and. I'm not the coach that you're going to come to that's going to just make it all about you. I'm going to be like, let's bring your partner in, let's bring your friend in, and be really mindful of that relational container if they're in a relationship with someone that's not abusing them, or, you know, that there's disclaimers for that, of course.
I think we all have the right intentions, you know, but oftentimes it's like we're walking around like Edward Scissorhands. The goal is to be good, but we just don't have the tools for it. And we can end up hurting people and destroying relationships if we don't, you know, form those, you know, for the good habits of communication. For me, communication is huge.
It's
and
huge.
I think one of the pitfalls of my marriage was the fact that we communicated in a completely different way. And the older you get, the less you are willing to be tolerant of that.
Yeah. And when we can't bridge that, the disconnect, just it's really difficult. It's really painful. It's hard. I get it. You know, communication is huge. One of the biggest reasons couples end up not being able to go the long run. It's hard.
Yeah.
You know?
In your practice in the last, you know, however many years that you've been doing this, what's been like the biggest breakthrough for you personally that you've been able to say, I can apply this to me and this is like my aha moment?
I know exactly what it is.
Let's hear it.
It's literally with that. It's from going to not being able to communicate what's happening for me with vulnerability and responsibility to being able to say to you, Ellina, you know, when you did that thing yesterday, it really hurt me.
Yeah.
It really hurt me. And you didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't your fault. This is my stuff. I'm sharing it with you so that you know me and you know kind of what my sensitivities are. But I love you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And really holding that both and is my life's work.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about being authentic and transparent and honest and just dumping our stuff on another person. It's saying the truth of what's happening for us, but also caring about the person that's listening and holding that relationship in our heart at the same time.
Absolutely. You can do it all with grace. And it's really learning that grace. And one of the breakthroughs for me is really letting go of these big words, right? That we hang over our heads. Going back to that statement that I was told when I was young, that's not something an Armenian girl does. I carried that with me for so many years, and that took different form throughout the years in different ways. You know, that's not something this kind of person does. That's not something that kind of person does. And I think it was really understanding, okay, I'm going to give that right back to you because that doesn't agree with who I am.
Beautiful.
And I can discern for myself exactly what it means to be an Armenian. You know, I feel like I've done so much for my community, and I found that voice, I found that platform. And it had absolutely nothing to do with choosing one side of myself or another. It was just embracing all of it.
Beautiful.
And I think that you can do all of it with grace and the utmost class, and you can just be the free spirit, because the hippie girl is never going away.
She's not going anywhere. We don't want her to go away.
No, she's what makes...
She's you.
She adds the effervescence. And I think it took a really long time for me to embrace that. You know, you can be both sides. It's not mutually exclusive. You can be very proud of your culture and represent your culture, but at the same time say, me on the inside, I'm a little different. And I'm going to live that life too. And I'm going to give her all the opportunity to be that person.
We want a variety and beauty in our community. We don't want everyone to be a robot and be exactly like each other and act the same exact. What is that? That doesn't even know. That doesn't.
And you don't need to
meaningless.
put yourself into a situation to feel safe. no matter how great it feels, really take the time to look at it from all the different angles, because safety it's fleeting. You have to create that safety for yourself so you can carry it with you. Now I am at my most vulnerable as a single mom, but I've never felt more empowered. Not because I have anything more than I did back then. In fact, I have less. But what I have is that self-trust that no matter what, I'm going to be fine.
So beautiful, Lena.
Because I can figure it out.
Yes,
I have, from the time we met, 18 years of experience.
You've been figuring it out.
Right.
You're more than figuring it out.
It's the experience, and you really have to just trust yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think, when we have that self-trust and that deep connection to self, I think that's the one of the most beautiful gifts that we can then also give to relationship, is that we can, now I'm not trying to source that safety from you. I have the sense of safety, and I can actually help contribute to you also feeling safe.
Absolutely.
It's so powerful. The bilateral.
What's the next breakthrough for you?
The next one, oh man, I think it'll always be working through my shame. I think that's always going to be there for me. The amot, which means shame in our culture, and allowing myself to continue to be seen. I'm doing these interviews, podcasts. It's hard. It's hard to.
You need to be
expose.
seen. You're
Thanks,
a
Ellina.
brilliant, beautiful person. You have to
Aw,
be seen.
Thank you. And it's the safety piece, right? Like, oh my gosh, is there going to be judgment? Am I going to be attacked? What are they going to think? But I'm like, I've been saying those stories in my mind already. Nobody can say anything worse than what I've already worked through in my head.
Oh yeah,
right?
Totally.
But it's still, there's always that feeling of like, ugh, but I'm working through just continuing to allow myself to be visible.
Yeah.
And surrendering to whatever comes after that.
You said judgment, and I think anyone who judges anyone else is really dealing with their own internal judgment.
Definitely.
And anything that anyone throws at you, they've already thrown it to themselves. They're just now projecting it on to someone else. And so the second you realize that, you realize,
Absolutely.
I don't need to take that on. That's your energy. It's not me. I define myself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you don't need to seek anyone's approval. You can be a very compassionate person, a good example, and do everything to be there for people. But there's a line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's next for me is really going to be seen and heard right here on this podcast.
Okay.
I think, this is a really cool space. No, totally.
That's
It's
great.
I'm having really amazing people, such as yourself, coming on from different, industries and different walks of life. We're going to talk about, everything from energy healing to spiritual work to checking your hormones to diet and exercise to having real friends who are going to come on here and again have like really vulnerable conversations. It's everything because I'm at a place in my life where I'm open and I don't have a plan for what's next. And I think that that's such a liberating feeling. And so as I'm going to physically be living that out in my, personal life, I'm also going to be kind of allowing my mind to expand in this space too through all these conversations. So I hope you all stick around.
Stick around, everybody. More to come.
More to come. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course.
This is so great.
I'm so honored, and I can't wait to hear all the upcoming conversations that people are just going to be blown away by.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Breaking Through with Ellina Abovian. For our community to grow, please like and share, and also leave a review on this episode. Of course, you can find me on social media and let me know what you'd like to talk about in future episodes. Nothing is off limits, so let's have some fun.